probably get started and then
yeah, we can get started here. We just because I know Boredom also has to run shortly. Just so yeah, we'll get started here, and then whenever Cloudhead can join, he hopefully can hop on and also answer a few questions. But yeah, welcome everyone to the first proposal review. This call is taking the place of the monthly governance calls that we were doing before. This call will be the format of this call will be just heavily focused on the actual proposals that are open and going through the governance process this month. We have the proposal authors here from Open Proposals and a recently passed proposal to answer a few questions. Usually this call would provide an opportunity for proposal authors to actually present their proposals that are on the forum right now. But we have this very unique situation that all of the proposal authors actually already presented their proposals in the community call last week, which probably won't happen again. I guess maybe this time next year, but this probably won't happen very often. So this call will actually just be a Q&A. As you saw in my announcements and notes for this call, I had kindly asked everyone to please watch that recording in preparation for this call, so we can really just use this time to focus on open questions for the proposal authors. So yeah, if you haven't watched it yet, I highly recommend it. It was a really great call, and the proposal authors gave really good summaries and already answered quite a few questions in that call as well. I just posted the link to that recording from that call in the chat. And it's also like sections, so like you can skip around in the video to like watch different sections to make it easier as well. Yeah, so basically, based on that, this call will probably be shorter than upcoming proposal review calls. But yeah, I still wanted to get into the rhythm and give everyone an opportunity to ask questions and further discuss some details about the proposals as well. If there are no questions from the community, I also have a list of things I would love to ask and discuss further. So yeah, maybe we'll just jump in. A reminder again that Boredom will actually have to run early. So if you have any questions for Boredom in the grants org proposal, be great if you could ask them now, sooner rather than later. One thing I will mention before we get started is just to mention all of the open proposals that we have. So right this month we have the RadicleOrg proposal, the DRIPS org proposal, the grants org proposal, and the foundation org actually just passed. But yeah, we also have the proposal authors from that proposal also on this call today. So yes, Abby, I saw you had a question. I will pass it over to you.
Yeah, cool. I have a couple questions, and maybe, yeah, Boredom and LA, I'll ask mine for you and then save Alexis for later. So Boredom, I had a quick question. I obviously have reviewed your proposal a lot. I wanted to ask how you're thinking about the budget so we funded the current season, and you have the budget. So the proposal isn't asking for any more funding, but how do you the budget being distributed over this year and then into next year? I'm starting to think about, like, in general, like basically how much we should be targeting to allocate year to year. And so how do you look at the budget distribution this year? Do you have any goals there, or do you have any goals for how long that this current funding should last, like for how many seasons?
So based on, can you hear me?
Yeah.
So we've been running it for about a year, and we've used 25% of the budget. So that means, yeah, like basically 250K over roughly 12 months. I imagine we'll go at a similar rate, assuming all things equal. So what I'm thinking is it would take us at that rate, right, to 700. Would take us actually 3 more years, assuming that everything remains equal, to burn through all of it. So that's kind of like the lowest burn rate, I would imagine. In terms of actually like where I could see it going. I know, as an example, one of the grants which we've been funding the most are the IDE plugins with Yorgos. He's been talking with, he's been working more and more closely with Heartwood, and kind of asking me on the side if maybe he might eventually spin up like his own proposal for an org at some point if they did some sort of like third-party integrations org or something like that. If that were to happen, then a large portion of what we're currently funding would actually go away, assuming that they either like work more closely, i.e. got paid by the Radical org at some point, or if they created their own org. So I think that's like in terms of not like a risk, but there's a factor in there where we might actually end up spending less if they go down that route. If they don't go down that route, I think we have like between 2 and 3 years of runway. And that's mostly what I've been thinking so far.
Nice, yeah, because it's a cool idea to think of. I mean, that kind of is the goal, right? Is that grants then are able to transform from one-off grant payments to more continuous work on the Radical stack. I think it's like it's definitely something to discuss, but it's also something that I think the drips pool can play into, right? Is that maybe there's even a more intermediary step, which is between grants and an org, and there's this kind of in between, which is like you're continuously funded by drips as like a developer who's contributing, yet you don't have to, you're not fully formed as like an org yet, which almost seems like that in between step, and something that could be the budget could be reformatted for, which is like we continuously fund developers with drips that are not working on like grant-based, project-based work anymore, that are like continuously working on work, but they're also not like completely ready to be structured as an org yet, which is actually like a really cool framing.
Yeah, and we're starting, so the next time that we fund one of your Yorgos' grants is going to be using drips. So I think we're definitely headed in that direction.
Cool, yeah. Because I think like also that's like the lowest burn rate, and I think that that's a good way to frame it, is like how long can we extend this amount of funding, but it's also like the rate of growth for how many grants that we're funding, and kind of like the value of those grants. And so there could be some interesting metrics there, especially if we're going to, if the goal is to like continuously fund developers for building on the stack. It's like how many grants do we transition to the drips pool or something. And so there's probably some interesting budget allocations that we can do. I mean, obviously I think this year we should just keep doing what we're doing, because it's like working and we're funding high quality grants, even if it's at like a slower rate, but we can start thinking about maybe what metrics we want to have there, or what goals. So
yeah, I agree with that. There's a few other type of like not low-hanging fruit at all, but just sort of like, I think like sort of going from IDE, like third-party plugins, to things like continuous integration, CI/CD stuff, which is sort of like they're sort of like the next sort of things that I think developers would care about. But I think that space in terms of funding is a bit vague. Like, should that come from grants? Should that come from Heartwood? Because it's definitely something that would integrate with Heartwood. So maybe I can kind of go back and think about how we might maybe figure out how like to co-fund stuff, if it makes sense. I'm fine if grants funds that sort of thing entirely, but I think it's going to be so contingent on integrating well with the Heartwood team.
Yeah, and having like those closer ties.
Yeah.
I mean, LA, a question for you is like with drips, like I think at least in my experience, I've been seeing most people who are interested in getting a grant seeing room for integration with drips, obviously, right? Because that's like, you know, what's ready to be used. And so I've actually had like a couple within the last couple of weeks of people reach out and saying that we want to like integrate with drips and stuff like that. Have you thought about how you want to engage with grants in terms of like towards your PMF goals? Have you thought about how you can best leverage grants? Because I think that that's like it's good to know what kind of grants you want to fund, like through drips via grants, you know? And I'm wondering what kind of projects you're looking for, and so we can kind of channel people in the right place.
We haven't done any like deep thinking yet on the grant front, but like, you know, we've been working with Boredom, and we've been we recently had a user session with him on, stuff we're developing. So we mostly right now, just interfacing with the team, but we haven't put a lot of thinking into like, okay, we as a Drips team, we want to fund these grants yet. So yeah, we're not there yet, but we're working closely with Boredom on that.
I can jump in there and tell you kind of more concretely how we've budgeted things out. So we have if we take 100% of the budget, we've essentially what we've done is we've allocated 10% to what we're calling use case grants. And so these would be things like the Drips SDK. So if we see a team that's adopting our protocol, not building on top of it, so not doing work like Yorgos, but more just taking what we've built and running with it as a dependency. I just call these use case grants, and we have allocated, and we actually put it up for a vote, which passed, to allocate 10% of the budget. That's around 100,000 USDC. So just know that there's like a pot there, which you've allocated 100,000 USDC, where we can say, hey, if you're using Radical Drips and you've got an awesome use case, just come to us with that, and we'll take a look, and we may or may not fund it.
Cool. Yeah, let's definitely. I'm excited for. I mean, I've been telling you that I'm excited to write something up on this so people kind of like know what's happening and everything. So I'm excited to do that in the coming weeks for sure. Okay, cool. I want to be conscious of both of your guys' time really quickly. I have one more question for LA, which can be continued on the forum, because I just dropped a bunch of questions, LA, on your proposal. And the one that I just thought maybe if you had seen and you wanted to discuss is in terms of the concept of PMF that you define in your objective for the Drips org proposal. Is that I was wondering if you had any more thoughts on how we could maybe further define this objective. The objective that I'm referring to is like our only objective is to prove product market fit for Drips.network, which is, yeah, we all know that that's the thing. And you have a lot of really cool metrics there that make a lot of sense to measure. But you said that you qualified product market fit as we see increased usage and retention on the below metrics. Yeah. And I'm wondering if there's a way that we can define it a little bit, like how much increased usage and retention, like what is the qualification for that? Because I feel like it's a little bit too undefined as an objective to be used as, like, for example, the community to effectively evaluate outside of the Drips org, right? So within the Drips org, I'm sure that you guys have like a very specific idea of like a gut check of what will make sense, but I feel like it's not defined enough for people outside of it to be able to use it as a way to qualify, like if Drips org found product market fit. Do you have any other internal ways that you guys are kind of defining that?
Yeah, so I totally get the point, and I think it's absolutely valid point. It's generally like we've done a lot of research on, okay, how does one go about, having confidence that they have found product market fit, and that's something that it's, a philosophical question, it seems, in the industry. Like no one has a good definition. Just generally, like, what all the founders and, like other product builders tell you is that the moment you move from a model where you push stuff out to a model where basically users just like want to pull stuff from you, that's when you know that you actually have something that is really sticking, with users, right? But the question, of course, like, okay, how is this measurable? How do you do this? So my two ideas was to, one, use the superhuman approach, and I should add the link there. So like with this team that was developing this mail client called Superhuman, they've done a lot of work and research on the same question, and then effectively they landed that the best way to go about this is by actually having these monthly surveys that you're sending to your users. And of course the tricky part for us would be, how do we do this in an address only type of mode, which is another problem. But the idea is that you send this service to your users and you're effectively asking them, like, if the service wasn't around, how disappointed would you feel? And then, there are three answers to this, like not disappointed at all, somehow disappointed, and then very disappointed. And then what they found out, and they have done a lot of research around that, is that basically if you have more than 40% of your users, being very disappointed if the service wasn't around, then that's usually a very strong metric, of course, above a scale of answers, right? That, okay, whatever you have built is sticky. So we absolutely plan on using that. And then we can be sharing a report from our surveys with the amount of answers and stuff like that to the community around that. So that's just one way. But then, of course, the other way is like, okay, if you have a model where your users are like, pulling stuff from you rather than you pushing things to your users, then that usually also translates into, usage and retention. I think retention is the key thing, but I struggle. I wrote down both usage and retention, because what if we have 100 users and we retain them very well? We retain them like if they come back, like, every month, right? We have perfect retention, but still, usage is very, very low. So it needs to be some form of combination between usage and retention. So, what that is, I don't know. Like, I think I will share some thoughts on the forum, but maybe I think that's where like you can all help to make it more of a collective exercise. So if you have strong opinions about, what is acceptable usage here, like, what percentage retention rate from users, like, comes back the next month, like having some combination of like, okay, if a user is more likely to stick around, for instance, right, like more than 50% retention rather than to not come back a month after, plus like a usage level above, I don't know, like X users, then maybe that's like, sticky enough, right? So something like that. But it's very, very hard. I think that the community together with us would have to collectively look at all of those numbers and say, okay, we see these users, we see these retention numbers, and then we see the survey answers about how disappointed people would be, and then collectively would have to reason like, okay, is this really sticking now? Is this good enough or not? But I don't know if there's this one, like, simple formula that we could use.
Really quickly, let me just a quick follow-up here with that. I completely agree that probably in a year it's going to be way easier for us to collectively be like, oh, this makes sense as like a compound metric for defining PMF. And so I think that it's just going to be up to you guys to like really be, reporting on it. And this is why I think both you and Alexi's proposals, I suggested probably like having some quarterly reporting flow, not because you need to, but more because we need to get in the habit of kind of like, if these are the metrics that we're stating, like how are we reflecting on these quarter to quarter, and also like evaluating them internally, and then also providing the space for kind of like external evaluation as well. And yeah, I think that it'll be, if you want to drop your thoughts in the forum, we can kind of continue the conversation there, because I do think that there's like this interesting compound way to kind of like combine these metrics to make it make sense as like a better, it's like you said, it's retention, but it's also general growth, which then relates to how much is actually transacting and how much are people becoming dependent on it. So I think just maybe adding some more color there on what you think and how you guys look at these metrics and how you reason about it right now. And then also baselines. So we kind of know where you guys are starting from, so that there's actually like an effective, there's a way to kind of, evaluate the progress at the end. So, but yeah, if you want to continue on the forum, we can continue chatting there as well. Cool.
Great. Yeah.
That's
thanks, Abby, for the questions and the calls there. Yeah. So I guess like another maybe just call out or question maybe for Boredom, so the grants org, and LA from the drips org, that something would be really useful maybe internally, but also just like for the community as well, is to have somewhere like a designated place to maybe show or track use cases for drips. I think that's actually something that I've been asked about before. If there is like a place for this, and maybe this already exists, but maybe also just between the two, as we were chatting about earlier, with grants kind of and drips interacting a little bit more, I think it'd be a really cool initiative to have that posted somewhere, or have it be included as like a metric of like new use case, how many new use cases, or like what were the new use cases for this quarter, etc. I don't know if you've thought about that, or if you have any thoughts to that.
No, that makes sense. I think for us it's a lot easier than like the Radical org, I guess, we will have a public dashboard on Dune Analytics because it's like Ethereum data, right? So most of like, unique addresses and value transacted and stuff like that, it's all public data on Ethereum. So it's very easy for us to have a dashboard that effectively like, updates every day, and, you will be able to track that. So that's something that we will provide. So you will have this link and anyone can just like go to this Dune Analytics dashboard, and then, you will be able to see the graphs and, drill down deeper. But yeah, the only thing that doesn't apply to is survey data, where we would have to use something else, and that's not going to be public, of course, and there are all of the privacy concerns as well. So, but yeah, with everything else, I think you would be able to see that on a Dune Analytics dashboard, and then I will report back when this is live.
Awesome, great. And then I actually had a question for Angie as well from the foundation org, which has actually already passed, but I wanted to ask for an update, also just to share with the community when we should be expecting to see these committee proposals from the 3 committees of the foundation org. So there's the governance committee, the marketing committee, and the operations committee. Just kind of wondering when we'll be able to view those or read through those.
So Abby can also correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think we want to have the committee proposals are currently being reviewed by the Foundation Council because they will be committees that are supported and governed by the foundation at the end of the day. So those proposals are being reviewed at the moment, and I hope to have them sort of passed by end of this week. And formally created then by the end of this week. And at that point, I think next week would be a good time to push these proposals potentially. I mean, Abby, give me a sense of your timeline. I think we know that, for instance, this will take additional work, at least on the operations side, because the current state of the proposal, the internal proposal, we can't share the same one externally. It just doesn't really make sense. So we will have to adapt for a publicized version. Abby, what are you thinking?
Yep, that reads for the timeline. I think that we did one review last week, and basically the marketing and governance committees are kind of making their final edits on theirs, and we're going to review them again this week and hopefully have them approved by the council by the end of the week. And then, like you said, it's going to take a little bit of work to kind of just construct a public version of it, just to make sure that we do it together and collectively. But I think we could post it by end of next week, depending on what everybody's schedules look like. So hopefully we'll have the committee proposals up by then. So, and we can just do those like together and just bucket them together and maybe just have it in one post or something that just like links out. So I'll chat with Sean about it.
I will say that with like a lot of the competing stuff right now with setting up and launching these orgs, at least on the, I can only speak from the operational side, but there's a lot going on right now that's really more time sensitive. So at the latest, I would say early May, once we've launched the new entities and the new orgs for Drips and Radical, then we'll be in, we'll have a lot more bandwidth to devote the time that this sort of thing deserves. Yeah.
And I think that governance and marketing might post something earlier, just in general, because they kind of want to talk about objectives, and also it frames some of the work that is going to be coming before May in terms of the rebrand and stuff. So we'll probably publish something a little bit earlier as well. And then we can maybe do like a more formal, like, this is the state of the committees, these are the objectives at beginning of May. So.
Great. Thank you so much for the update on that. And yeah, makes total sense. And I think that was also maybe just like a good call out or reminder as well of what you just said, Angie, of, prioritizing or just kind of all of the work that's being done in the background with this org setup of the entity creation and all of that fun stuff. But yeah, just wanted to get a quick status update on those committee proposals because we've mentioned them a few times in a few different calls. So yeah, that's great. Thanks for sharing, both of you. I don't know if I have a few other questions, but I wanted to also just pause and see if anyone else on the call had questions for each other or about any of the proposals.
I think we're also running up on time. There's only like 2 minutes before we hit half an hour. So, yeah, maybe if you have any that you want to dive into, Shelby, as well, now's a good time.
Yeah, I mean, I had a few for the Radical org, but that I know Abby also just posted a bunch of really great questions on the forum post there as well, on both the Radical org proposal and the DRIPS org proposal. So I'll just do maybe a quick call out there. If you haven't read through those, I would recommend going to take a look there, and the proposal authors will also hopefully have a chance to answer or respond to some of those questions as well before we go through before we move into the voting cycles next week. But yeah, I think maybe it's also fine if we wrap it up here. As I mentioned, a lot of other questions were answered or discussed in the community call recording last week. So if you want to go take a look at those and get some more context around some other details of the proposal. Otherwise, please feel free to drop into the proposals themselves, leave comments, questions, just because we will be moving these proposals forward into the formal review phase, which includes a snapshot vote. So starting on Monday of next week, of this coming week, is when the snapshot poll will be open. That will be up for 7 days. And then depending on the results of the snapshot proposals, those proposals will move on to a submission or governance on-chain vote the 4th week of this month. Just so everyone is kind of aware of that timeline. But yeah, I think it's if nobody has anything else they wanted to add or ask, maybe we can actually just wrap it up here. And yeah, this again was kind of an odd one, or an odd example of what these proposal review calls will look like, just because we already kind of did the whole presentation and question asking piece, a big part of it last week. But it was still great to have all of the proposal authors here. Thank you everyone for joining and answering questions and discussing these proposals further. I'm really looking forward to see how everything goes through the next 3 weeks through the voting cycle, and fingers crossed that we can get everything set up on the timelines that we have been working on or looking at for a while now. So yeah, thank you everyone, and yeah, you will see many more messages from me in the coming weeks.
Cool. Thanks, Shelby, for hosting.
Thanks, Shelby.
Thank you. Bye-bye.